close your eyes and let your breathing slow. Tonight, we're setting sail across centuries to a time when the Caribbean waters held both promise and peril, where the line between freedom and desperation blurred like the horizon at dawn. You're about to discover why the romanticized tales of pirate adventure bear little resemblance to the harsh realities of life aboard these floating prisons of wood and canvas. Please consider subscribing to the channel and hit the like button. Imagine the warm Caribbean breeze carrying not just the scent of salt and tropical blooms, but also the unmistakable odors of unwashed bodies, rotting provisions, and the ever-present dampness that clung to everything below deck. This wasn't the swashbuckling adventure of Hollywood dreams, but a world where survival meant enduring conditions that would break most modern spirits within hours. The golden age of piracy, roughly spanning from 1650 to 1730, created a unique society floating on the edges of civilization. These weren't just criminals seeking easy treasures. They were men and women who chose the uncertain freedom of the seas over the grinding poverty and rigid social structures of colonial life. Yet freedom, as you'll discover, came at a price, measured not just in gold, but in comfort, health, and often life itself. Picture yourself standing on a weathered dock in Port Royal, Jamaica, circa 1715, watching as a pirate vessel creaks against its moorings. The ship before you represents both liberation and imprisonment, wooden world where democratic ideals flourished alongside brutal violence, where treasure beyond imagination could be won or lost in a single raid. The very air seems to shimmer with possibility and danger, thick with the humid embrace of the tropics and the whispered promises of fortune. As we drift through these stories tonight, you'll walk the creaking decks alongside common sailors, feel the weight of tropical air, thick with humidity and tension, and understand why even the most fearsome pirates often longed for the simple pleasures of solid ground beneath their feet. Let the rhythm of imagined waves carry you into this world where adventure and misery sailed hand in hand across waters that sparkled like jewels under the Caribbean sun. Here, in this realm between sea and sky, ordinary people made extraordinary choices that would echo through history, like the distant boom of cannon fire across still waters. The morning sun pierces through the canvas and rigging above you, but there's no gentle awakening aboard this vessel. You've been jolted from restless sleep, not by any clock or bell, but by the sharp kick of a boot against your ribs and the harsh voice of the boatswain calling all hands to deck. Your body aches from sleeping on the hard wooden planks, pressed against a dozen other men in the cramped quarters below deck. The air down there was thick and suffocating, heavy with the breath of too many bodies, the sour smell of unwashed clothing, and the ever-present dampness that seems to seep into your very bones. As you stumble to your feet, you feel the familiar sting of rope burn on your palms, of constant companions since you joined this crew 3 months ago. Your hands, once soft from whatever life you lived before, are now permanently stained with tar and salt, the skin cracked and hardened into something that barely resembles what you once knew. The tropical sun has burned your skin to leather, and your hair hangs in greasy strands that no amount of seawater seems to cleanse. The ship rocks gently beneath your feet, a motion that once made you violently seasick, but now feels as natural as breathing. This vessel, a captured merchant brigantine renamed Freedom's Price, creaks and groans with every wave, a symphony of stressed wood and hemp that never quite lets you forget how thin the barrier is between you. The crushing depths below, the deck planks, worn smooth by countless bare feet, are already growing hot under the morning sun, and you know that by noon they'll be burning to the touch. Your stomach gnaws at itself with familiar hunger. Breakfast, if you can call it that, consists of hardtack biscuits so infested with weevils that you've learned to tap them against the ship's rail to shake out the larger ones before eating. The water in your cup has taken on a greenish tint and tastes of the wooden barrel where it's been stored for weeks. But you drink it anyway because dehydration under this merciless sun means death. The rum ration, distributed twice daily, burns your throat and clouds your mind. But it's the only thing that makes the maggoty salt pork palatable and the constant ache of your body bearable dot around you. Your fellow pirates move with the practiced efficiency of men who know that laziness or clumsiness can mean a brutal flogging or worse. There's Thomas, a former blacksmith from Bristol, whose massive arms now haul on the lines with mechanical precision. His back bears the scars of a disagreement with the previous captains in white lines that tell a story of 20 lashes for talking back. Beside him works Miguel, a Spanish fisherman who joined the crew after his village was burned by rival pirates. He speaks little English, but his weathered hands know every knot and splice better than men who sailed for decades. The hierarchy aboard this floating democracy is as rigid as any royal court. Despite the articles that supposedly guarantee every man an equal vote in matters of importance, the captain, elected by the crew, but ruling with absolute authority during battle, occupies the great cabin at the stern of space that might as well be a palace compared to your hammock in the crowded forecastle. The quartermaster, second in command and keeper of discipline, watches over the daily work with eyes that miss nothing. Cross him, and you might find yourself on the next island with nothing but the clothes on your back and a single pistol shot to defend yourself. The work begins before the sun clears the horizon and continues till darkness falls like a curtain across the Caribbean waters. Your hands pull on lines that control the massive canvas sails, each rope as thick as your wrist and rough enough to strip flesh from bone. The tropical sun beats down mercilessly, turning the tar-sealed deck into a griddle that burns through the soles of your feet. There's no shade except in the narrow strips cast by the sails and rigging. Competition for these precious spots of relief is fierce. By mid-morning, sweat pours from your body in streams, leaving salt crystals on your sun-darkened skin that itch and burn with every movement. Your shirt, if you still have one, clings to your back like a second skin, soaked through with perspiration that never seems to dry completely in the humid air. The smell of your own body mingles with those of your shipmates, creating a miasma that would be unbearable if you hadn't long since lost the luxury of a sensitive nose. The ship's routine revolves around the eternal cycle of maintenance that keeps this wooden world afloat. You spend hours picking oakum and raveling old rope fiber by fiber to stuff between the hull planks and keep the sea from rushing in. Your fingertips are permanently stained black with tar, and splinters work their way under your nails until your hands become a map of tiny infected wounds. The smell of hot pitch fills your nostrils as you help seal the deck seams. A thick, acrid odor that clings to everything and makes food taste like roofing material. Water is more precious than gold on this floating prison. Each man receives a carefully measured ration twice daily, barely enough to replace what the tropical heat steals from your body. You learn to catch rainwater on pieces of canvas during the brief but violent squalls that sweep across the Caribbean, wringing every precious drop into whatever container you can find. The water barrels, stored deep in the ship's hold, develop a green scum after weeks at sea, and the taste becomes so foul that even mixing it with rum barely makes it drinkable. The food situation grows more desperate with each passing week. Salt pork, your primary protein, often arrives on your plate, writhing with maggots that have to be picked out individually or simply ignored in favor of nutrition. The ship's biscuits, called hardtack, become so infested with weevils that experienced pirates tap them against the deck to shake out the larger insects before eating. Fresh vegetables are a distant memory, and many of the crew show the early signs of scurvy-loose teeth, bleeding gums, and a bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of rest seems to cure. Sleep, when it comes, offers little respite from the harsh realities of pirate life. Below deck, in the cramped forecastle, you share space with a dozen other men in hammocks strung so close together that turning over requires coordination with your neighbors. The air is thick and stifling, heavy with the breath of too many bodies, and the ever-present smell of bilge water sloshing in the ship's bottom. Rats scurry through the darkness, bold enough to run across sleeping men in their search for food scraps. The sounds of the ship never cease: the creak of stressed timbers, the whistle of wind through rigging, the splash of waves against the hull. These become the lullaby that carries you into restless sleep, broken frequently by the calls for night watches or the sudden alarm that might signal an approaching vessel. Streams, when they come, are often of solid ground, fresh water, and food that doesn't move when you try to eat it, despite the hardships. There's an undeniable sense of freedom that permeates life aboard this vessel. Unlike the rigid social structures of colonial society, where birth determines destiny and poverty is often a permanent condition, the pirate ship operates on principles that would be considered radical in any civilized port. Every man has a voice in major decisions, from choosing hunting grounds to electing officers. Prize money is distributed according to agreed-upon shares, with common sailors receiving far more than they could ever earn in legitimate employment. This democracy, however, exists within strict boundaries of discipline and tradition. Ships articles read aloud when new members join the crew, outline rules that govern everything from the distribution of booty to the punishment for cowardice in battle. Justice is swift and often brutal. Man caught stealing from his shipmates might find himself marooned on a deserted island with nothing but a pistol and a single shot. Desertion during battle means death, often administered immediately by the quartermaster's blade. As the weeks blur into months aboard this floating world, you begin to understand that survival depends not just on enduring the physical hardships, but on navigating the complex social currents that flow between the crew members like invisible tides. The ship becomes a microcosm of humanity at its most raw and honest, where pretense falls away like paint peeling under the relentless tropical sun, and a man's true character emerges through the crucible of shared suffering and mutual dependence. Your days follow a rhythm as predictable as the trade winds that fill your sails. Before dawn breaks across the endless expanse of Caribbean waters, you're roused from fitful sleep by the boatswain's whistle, a shrill sound that cuts through the groaning symphony of the ship's timbers and the splash of waves against the hull. The darkness below deck is absolute, broken only by the faint glow of the ship's lanterns swaying with each roll of the vessel. Around you, your shipmates stir with practiced efficiency, Kahnemans, economical and precise. Wasted motion in the cramped quarters means bruised shins and angry words. The first task of each day is the pumping of the bilge, a ritual that reminds everyone aboard just how fragile this wooden world truly is. Water seeps constantly through the hull, despite all efforts to keep it sealed, and, without regular pumping, the ship would gradually settle lower in the water until the sea claimed her entirely. You take your turn at the pump handles, feeling the resistance as you force the accumulated seawater up through the ship's bows and out through the scuppers. The work is monotonous but vital, and the steady rhythm of the pump becomes a meditation that helps clear your mind for the day ahead as the sun climbs higher, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that would take your breath away if you had the luxury of stopping to appreciate beauty. The ship comes alive with purposeful activity. The sails must be adjusted constantly to catch every whisper of wind, and you find yourself scrambling up the ratlins with the agility of a monkey, your bare feet finding purchase on the rope ladder that stretches toward the swaying masthead. The higher you climb, the more pronounced the ship's motion becomes, till you're swinging through an arc of 20 feet or more with each roll of the vessel. From your perch in the rigging, its Caribbean spreads before you like a living jewel, its surface shifting between deep blue and brilliant turquoise, depending on the depth of the water below. Islands appear on the horizon like emeralds scattered across blue silk, okay? Each one representing potential sanctuary or danger, depending on who controls its harbors and what flags fly over its fortifications. The wind-up here is constant and cooling, a blessed relief from the stifling heat of the deck below. But it also carries the ever-present risk of sudden squalls that can turn deadly in seconds. The work aloft requires not just courage, but a particular kind of intelligence. You must read the wind and weather like a book, understanding how changes in cloud formation or shifts in wind direction might affect the ship's progress. The canvas sails, patched and repatched until they resemble patchwork quilts, require constant attention. A sudden gust can split a weakened sail from top to bottom, leaving the ship vulnerable and the crew scrambling to rig emergency canvas before the vessel loses way entirely. Your hands have become tools shaped by this environment, permanently curved to grip rope and marked by countless small scars from splinters and cuts. The salt water that constantly washes over the deck has tanned your skin to leather and bleached your hair to the color of old hemp. When you catch sight of your reflection in the polished metal of a cutlass or the captain's mirror, you barely recognize the person staring back on is whatever soft civilization you once wore, replaced by something harder and more elemental. The social dynamics aboard the ship revealed themselves slowly, like layers of an onion peeling away under the Caribbean sun. Captain Blackwood, elected to his position by crew vote, but ruling with the authority of absolute command during times of danger, maintains his position through a careful balance of democratic leadership and iron discipline. It's a man in his 40s who lost his left leg below the knee to a Spanish cannonball during the sack of Cartagena 3 years ago, and now walks with a pronounced limp that somehow makes him seem more formidable rather than less. The quartermaster, a weathered Scotsman named Macready, whose arms are covered in tattoos that tell the story of his wanderings across every ocean, serves as the crew's advocate and disciplinarian. He's the one who settles disputes between crew members overseas, the distribution of food and water, and ensures that the ship's articles are followed to the letter. His word carries almost as much weight as the captain's, and his approval can mean the difference between acceptance and ostracism in this floating community. Among your fellow crew members, alliances form and dissolve like morning mist, based on shared backgrounds, mutual protection, or simple compatibility. There's Dutch Henry, a giant of a man whose gentle nature belies his fearsome appearance. He's become something of a protective older brother to the younger members of the crew, sharing his knowledge of seamanship and offering quiet encouragement during the most difficult moments. His presence during the evening meal turns what could be a grim affair into something approaching companionship. Then there's Portuguese Silva, a man whose quick temper and quicker blade have earned him a reputation that keeps others at arm's length. He sleeps with a knife under his pillow and trusts no one completely. Yet his skill with the cutlass and his knowledge of the Spanish treasure routes make him invaluable to the crew's success. You've learned to read the signs of his mood, the set of his shoulders, the way his hand unconsciously moves toward his weapon when he feels threatened or challenged. The cook, an ancient African man known only as Bones, rules his small galley kingdom with absolute authority despite his status as one of the lowest-ranking crew members. His ability to transform the ship's meager and often spoiled provisions into something resembling edible meals has made him indispensable, and even the captain treats him with a respect that borders on deference. Bones speaks little, but his eyes miss nothing, and you've begun to suspect that he understands far more about the ship's politics and plans than anyone realizes. As the afternoon heat reaches its brutal peak, work continues with the relentless persistence that defines life aboard a pirate vessel. The deck planks become too hot to touch with bare skin, and anyone foolish enough to handle metal tools without protection risks serious burns. The tar used to seal the ship's seams melts in the heat, creating sticky black pools that cling to boots and clothing. Even the rope rigging becomes uncomfortably warm to the touch, making the necessary work of sail handling a test of endurance as much as skill. Water becomes an obsession during these blazing afternoons. Carefully measured and jealously guarded, disappears quickly under the assault of the tropical sun and the constant labor required to keep the ship functioning. You learn to conserve every drop, using seawater for washing when possible, and saving the precious fresh water for drinking. The taste of the stored water grows progressively worse as the voyage lengthens, first developing a wooden flavor from the barrels, then a green tinge that speaks of algae and worse things growing in the stagnant liquid. The evening meal, served as the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, becomes the day's most important social ritual. The crew gathers on deck in whatever shade they can find, sharing the common pot of whatever Bones has managed to create from the day's provisions. Conversation flows as freely as the rum ration, with men sharing stories of past adventures, complaints about present hardships, and dreams of future fortunes. These moments of camaraderie help bind the crew together, despite their differences, and remind everyone that they're part of something larger than themselves. The stories told during these evening gatherings become the oral history of pirate life, passed down from older hands to newer recruits like yourself. You hear tales of legendary captains and famous raids of ships laden with treasure beyond imagination, and battles where courage and cunning triumphed over impossible odds. But you also hear the darker stories of crews who turned on each other over shares of booty, of captains who went mad under the isolation and responsibility of command, of men who simply disappeared during the night watches, never to be seen again as darkness falls across the Caribbean waters. The ship's routine shifts to accommodate the dangers and opportunities that night might bring. Watch schedules are carefully maintained, with teams of men keeping constant vigilance for other vessels, changes in weather, or the telltale signs of land approaching. The night watches become times of quiet contemplation, when the sounds of the ship and sea create a hypnotic rhythm that can lull the unwary into dangerous inattention. The darkness also brings relief from the day's heat, as cooling breezes sweep across the deck and the temperature drops to something approaching comfortable. This is when you might have a few precious moments to yourself, time to mend clothing, write in a journal if you're literate and have managed to acquire paper and ink, or simply stand at the rail and contemplate the endless expanse of stars reflected in the dark water. These quiet moments become treasures to be hoarded and savored. Brief respites from the constant demands of shipboard life. Your body has adapted to this environment in ways you never imagined possible. The constant motion of the ship, once nauseating and disorienting, now feels as natural as walking on solid ground. Your sense of balance has improved dramatically, allowing you to work confidently on deck even during rough weather when the ship rolls and pitches like a wild horse. Your hands and feet have developed a sensitivity to the ship's moods. You can feel through the soles of your feet when the vessel encounters a different current or when the wind shifts slightly. Information that helps you anticipate the next command from the officers. The isolation of shipboard life creates its own psychological pressures that can be as challenging as any physical hardship. Weeks can pass without sight of land or other vessels, creating a sense of existing in a world apart from normal human society. The same faces, the same voices, the same cramped spaces become the entire universe, and tensions that might seem trivial on land can escalate into serious conflicts. When there's no escape from the source of irritation, you've learned to bite your tongue and swallow anger, understanding that maintaining harmony within the crew is essential for everyone's survival. Letters from home, when they exist at all, become treasures beyond price. Read and reread until the paper falls apart from handling. Most of the crew have left behind families, sweethearts, and former lives that now seem like half-remembered dreams. The decision to join a pirate crew often means burning bridges to the civilized world, accepting that return to normal society might be impossible even if the desire for such a return still exists. The true test of your endurance aboard the Freedom's Price comes not during the busy days of sailing and maintenance, but during those endless periods when the wind dies completely and the ship sits motionless on water as smooth as polished glass. These doldrums, as experienced sailors call them, can last for days or even weeks, creating a different kind of hell than the back-breaking labor of active sailing, without the cooling breeze created by the ship's movement. The tropical heat becomes a living thing that presses down on the vessel like a suffocating blanket, making every breath and effort and every movement a trial of endurance. During these breathless periods, the ship becomes a floating oven, with the deck planks too hot to walk on barefoot and the metal fittings scalding to the touch. The tar in the seams bubbles and melts, creating sticky black pools that cling to everything they touch. Below deck, the air becomes so thick and stifling that many of the crew choose to sleep on the open deck, despite the risk of sudden squalls or enemy attack. The stored water grows warm and takes on an increasingly foul taste, while the salt pork develops a greenish sheen that speaks of accelerated spoilage in the oppressive heat. It's during these trials that you truly come to understand the psychological pressures that can drive men to madness or violence aboard a pirate vessel, with nothing to do but wait for wind and endure the heat. Tempers fray like rope left too long in the sun. Arguments break out over trivial matters: who gets the last cup of relatively fresh water, whose turn it is to work the pump, or whether someone is receiving more than their fair share of shade. These disputes, which might be laughed off during normal sailing conditions, can escalate into serious conflicts when there's no escape from the source of irritation and no outlet for the frustration that builds like pressure in a sealed cask. You've witnessed firsthand how quickly civilized behavior can break down when men are pushed beyond their limits. Last month, during a particularly brutal doldrums that lasted 9 days, 2 crew members came to blows over a perceived slight involving the distribution of hardtack. Started as angry words escalated to drawn knives, and only the quartermaster's intervention prevented bloodshed. The incident left both men sullen and watchful, creating a tension that still lingers like smoke from a guttering candle, ready to flare into open flame at the slightest provocation. The ship's officers understand these dangers and work constantly to maintain morale and discipline during the most trying periods. Captain Blackwood, despite his gruff exterior and iron discipline, reveals a deeper understanding of human nature during these tests. He organizes contests and games to keep the crew occupied, knee-throwing competitions, arm wrestling tournaments, and storytelling sessions that help pass the endless hours and provide outlets for competitive energies that might otherwise turn destructive. His weathered face, marked by years of sun and salt spray, shows a paternal concern for his men that goes beyond mere military command. The quartermaster, Macready, becomes even more vigilant during doldrums, his sharp eyes constantly scanning the men, crew for signs of brewing trouble. He's learned to read the subtle signals that precede conflict, the way men cluster into suspicious groups, the increased frequency of complaints about food or water, the gradual breakdown of the small courtesies that help maintain peace in close quarters. His interventions are swift and usually effective, redirecting anger and frustration before they can explode into violence that might tear the crew apart. These periods of enforced idleness also reveal the hidden depths of your shipmates as men who normally focus all their energy on the demands of sailing find time to reveal aspects of their personalities that remain hidden during busier times. Dutch Henry, the gentle giant who serves as unofficial protector of the younger crew members, reveals himself to be surprisingly well-educated, able to recite poetry and discuss philosophy with an eloquence that seems at odds with his rough appearance. In sailors' vocabulary, his past gradually revealed through careful questioning and patient listening, includes time as a university student in Amsterdam before family financial ruin forced him to seek his fortune at sea. Portuguese Silva, normally quick to anger and suspicious of everyone, shows a different side during the long, quiet hours of doldrums. He carves intricate figures from pieces of driftwood with a delicacy that speaks of artistic training, creating small masterpieces that he gives away to other crew members with gruff embarrassment. His hands, so quick and deadly with the cutlass, work the wood with infinite patience and surprising gentleness, transforming rough chunks of timber into elegant birds and graceful ships that capture something essential about the sea's beauty and freedom. The cook, Ancient Bones, becomes a philosopher and historian during these periods, sharing stories and wisdom accumulated over decades of voyaging across every ocean. His tales span continents and cultures, revealing a depth of experience that commands respect even from the most hardened pirates. He speaks of trading posts in Madagascar where exotic spices filled the air with perfume, of icebound harbors in the North Atlantic where men's breath freezes in their beards, and of tropical paradises where fruit falls from trees and fresh water flows in abundance. His stories become escape valves for minds pressed too hard by the confines of shipboard life. You begin to understand that the true treasure sought by most pirates isn't gold or silver, but the freedom to live outside the rigid social structures that dominate life in the colonial world. Many of your shipmates are escaped servants, runaway slaves, or men fleeing debts and obligations that would have trapped them in lives of endless servitude. The ship represents liberation from the grinding poverty and social immobility that characterized most people's existence in the early 18th century, even if that freedom comes at the cost of comfort, safety, and often life itself. The democratic ideals that govern pirate society become most apparent during the crew meetings held to decide important matters of navigation, target selection, and resource allocation. Every man aboard has a voice and a vote, regardless of his background or previous station in life. Former slaves sit as equals beside former gentlemen, and decisions are made based on practical considerations rather than inherited privilege or social rank. This radical egalitarianism, while imperfect and often strained by human nature and practical necessities, represents something genuinely revolutionary in a world where most people live, and die in the social class of their birth. The ship's articles, the written constitution that governs behavior and defines rights and responsibilities, are treated with almost religious reverence by the crew. These documents, unique to each vessel, but following common patterns developed over decades of pirate tradition, establish principles of justice and compensation that would be considered progressive even by modern standards. They guarantee medical care for the wounded, compensation for injuries sustained in service, and democratic participation in major decisions. Violations of these articles are treated as serious offenses, with punishments ranging from reduced shares of prize money to marooning on deserted islands. Your understanding of violence and its role in pirate society has evolved considerably during your months aboard the Freedom's Price. While a popular imagination portrays pirates as bloodthirsty killers who murder for sport, the reality is far more complex and pragmatic. Violence, when it occurs, serves specific purposes: intimidation to encourage surrender, discipline to maintain order, or justice to punish serious violations of the ship's code. Unnecessary killing is actually discouraged because it interferes with the primary goal of acquiring wealth, and because it makes surrender less likely in future encounters. The weapons training that occupies much of your free time serves multiple purposes beyond mere preparation for combat. Learning to handle cutlass, pistol, and boarding axe builds confidence and provides a sense of personal security in a world where strength and skill determine survival. The daily practice sessions, supervised by experienced fighters like Silva and the quartermaster, also serve as physical exercise that helps maintain health and morale during the long periods between action. The rhythmic clash of steel on steel becomes a meditation that helps focus the mind and burn off the frustrations that build during close confinement. When prey is finally spotted on the horizon, the transformation of the ship and crew is dramatic and immediate. The lazy atmosphere of routine sailing vanishes, replaced by focused intensity that crackles like electricity in the air before a storm. Every man knows his role in the carefully choreographed dance of pursuit and capture that has been practiced countless times during the quiet hours. Weapons are distributed and checked. Strategy is discussed and refined. The ship is prepared for the possibility of battle with an efficiency that speaks of long experience and mutual trust. The pursuit of a potential prize becomes a test of seamanship, strategy, and nerve that can last for hours or even days. Your ship must close the distance while avoiding the target's attempts to escape, maneuvering to cut off routes to friendly ports or naval protection while positioning for the most advantageous attack. The work is exhausting, requiring constant sail adjustments and course corrections as both vessels attempt to gain advantage through superior sailing skill and knowledge of local conditions. During these pursuits, you begin to understand the complex calculus that determines whether an encounter will result in easy surrender, fierce resistance, or a running battle that could last for hours. Merchant vessels, dependent on speed and stealth rather than fighting power, often surrender quickly when faced with superior force. Calculating that cooperation offers better chances of survival than resistance. Naval vessels and well-armed merchant ships present different challenges, requiring careful assessment of relative strength and determination before deciding whether to press an attack or seek easier prey elsewhere. The moment of actual boarding, when it comes, is both terrifying and exhilarating. A few minutes of chaos and violence that can determine the fortunes of everyone involved. The sight of armed pirates swarming over the rail, cutlasses gleaming in the tropical sun, and faces fierce with battle fury is usually enough to break the resistance of merchant crews who have no desire to die defending someone else's cargo. Your role in these encounters is usually supportive rather than heroic, helping to secure prisoners, searching for hidden valuables, and beginning the process of transferring cargo to your own vessel. The aftermath of a successful capture brings its own challenges and opportunities. Prize goods must be cataloged and divided according to the ship's articles, with each crew member receiving shares based on their rank and contribution to the enterprise. The process requires careful negotiation and oversight to prevent disputes that could tear the crew apart. Prisoners must be secured and fed, tending to the strain on the ship's limited resources, while potentially providing valuable intelligence about other targets or naval movements in the area. Navigation during extended cruises becomes an art that combines scientific knowledge with intuitive understanding of wind, current, and weather patterns. The ship's navigator, usually an officer with formal education and access to charts and instruments, must plot courses that balance the need to find prey with the necessity of avoiding areas where naval patrols might be encountered. Islands must be approached with caution, as friendly ports can quickly become hostile if political situations, change, or bounties are offered for the crew's capture. The constant awareness of danger creates a particular mindset among pirates that affects every aspect of daily life. You learn to sleep lightly, ready to spring into action at the first sign of trouble. You become expert at reading the subtle signs that might indicate the approach of enemy vessels' changes in bird behavior, unusual cloud formations, or the barely perceptible vibrations that travel through water faster than sound through air. This hypervigilance becomes second nature, a survival skill that serves you well in a world where letting down your guard, even briefly, can mean death or capture. Your relationship with the sea itself evolves from fear and discomfort to something approaching partnership. You learn to read its moods and respect its power, while finding ways to use its forces to your advantage. The Caribbean waters that once seemed like an endless, hostile emptiness become familiar territory, marked by currents, depths, and seasonal patterns that can be navigated with increasing confidence. The ability to predict weather changes by observing cloud formations and feeling shifts in wind direction becomes as important as any weapon in your arsenal of survival skills. As we drift away from the swaying deck of our imagined pirate vessel, let your mind settle into the quieter waters of biography, where the life of one man emerges from the mists of Caribbean history like a ship materializing out of morning fog. Edward Teach, the man who would become known to the world as Blackbeard, began his transformation from ordinary sailor to legendary terror, not in some dramatic moment of rebellion, but through the gradual accumulation of choices that would eventually reshape the very nature of piracy in the early 18th century. The early years of Edward Teach remain shrouded in the kind of mystery that seems to follow certain figures throughout history, as if the man himself was destined to become more legend than flesh and blood. What we know suggests he was born sometime around 1680, likely in Bristol, England, a bustling port city where the smell of tar, salt water, mingled with the sounds of commerce and the dreams of men seeking fortunes beyond the horizon. Bristol in those days was a gateway to the New World, its harbors filled with vessels carrying everything from manufactured goods to human cargo. And young Edward would have grown up surrounded by the maritime culture that shaped the British Empire's expansion across the Atlantic. His early life, like that of many sailors of his era, was probably marked by the kind of grinding poverty that made the risks of seafaring seem preferable to the certainties of destitution on land. The England of Edward's youth was a place where social mobility was limited and opportunities for advancement were jealously guarded by those born into privilege. For a young man with intelligence, ambition, and physical courage, but lacking family connections or inherited wealth, the sea offered one of the few paths to something better than a lifetime of menial labor and quiet desperation: the transformation. From Edward Teach the sailor to Edward Teach the pirate likely began during Queen Anne's War, the American phase of the War of Spanish Succession that raged from 1702 to 1713. Like many men who would later turn to piracy, Teach probably served aboard privateers, legally sanctioned pirates who carried government letters of marque authorizing them to attack enemy shipping in the name of the crown. This experience would have provided him with the skills, connections, and mindset that would prove essential to his later career as an outlaw of the seas. Privateering. During Queen Anne's War was a brutal but potentially lucrative business that attracted men willing to risk everything for the chance of substantial rewards. The line between legitimate privateering and outright piracy was often thin and sometimes non-existent, depending on political circumstances and the willingness of authorities to ask difficult questions about methods and end targets. For young men like Edward Teach, this gray area provided both opportunity and education in the arts of naval warfare, ship handling, and the psychology of intimidation that would later serve him so well as a pirate captain. The end of Queen Anne's War in 1713 created a crisis for thousands of sailors and privateer crews who suddenly found themselves without legal employment and facing the prospect of return to the grinding poverty they had escaped. The Royal Navy, bloated with wartime recruitment, shed personnel like a snake shedding skin, leaving experienced seamen to compete for the limited positions available on merchant vessels. Many of these displaced mariners, possessing valuable skills but facing economic uncertainty, began to see piracy as a natural extension of their wartime activities, the same work, essentially, but without government sanction and with potentially greater rewards. It was during this period of transition and uncertainty that Edward Teach began to associate with the pirate captain Benjamin Hornigold, a relationship that would prove crucial to his development as both sailor and leader. Hornigold, operating out of the notorious pirate haven of New Providence in the Bahamas, commanded one of the most successful and well-organized pirate crews in the Caribbean. His operation was sophisticated enough to include multiple vessels and a network of contacts that extended from the American colonies to the Spanish Main, providing both intelligence about potential targets and markets for stolen goods. Under Hornigold's tutelage, Teach learned the subtle arts of pirate leadership that went far beyond simple seamanship and fighting ability. He observed how successful pirate captains balanced the democratic ideals of pirate society with the need for absolute authority during times of crisis. He studied the complex dynamics of crew management, understanding how to maintain loyalty and discipline among men who had specifically chosen piracy to escape conventional authority structures. Most importantly, he began to develop his own approach to the psychological warfare that was often more important than actual combat in determining the outcome of pirate encounters. The island of New Providence during Teach's apprenticeship years was a unique society that existed in the spaces between empires, a place where conventional rules were suspended and new forms of social organization emerged from necessity and opportunity. The harbor at Nassau could accommodate dozens of pirate vessels at once, creating a floating city where information, supplies, and personnel moved freely between crews. Taverns and brothels catered to men who might have fortunes to spend, but could never be certain they would live to see another payday, creating an atmosphere of reckless celebration mixed with underlying tension that could explode into violence at any moment. In this environment, Teach began to develop the persona that would eventually make him the most feared pirate of his era. His physical presence was already intimidating. He was a large man, probably over 6 feet tall at a time when the average height was considerably less, with the broad shoulders and calloused hands of someone who has spent years handling heavy rope and canvas in all kinds of weather. But it was his understanding of psychology and theater that would set him apart from other pirate captains who relied primarily on reputation and violence to achieve their goals. The development of the Blackbeard persona was a gradual process that revealed Teach's sophisticated understanding of image and intimidation. He began experimenting with his appearance, allowing his naturally dark beard to grow to unusual length, and learning to braid it with colored ribbons that made him instantly recognizable and memorable. His clothing became more elaborate and theatrical, incorporating elements that suggested both wealth and danger-fine coats taken from captured merchants, weapons of unusual design or decoration, and accessories that marked him as someone who operated outside normal social conventions. But the most innovative aspect of Teach's transformation was his use of hemp and sulfur to create the smoking effect that would become his trademark. By placing slow-burning hemp matches under his hat and in his beard, this could appear wreathed in smoke during battle, creating an almost supernatural appearance that terrorized opponents and impressed followers. This theatrical touch demonstrated a level of psychological sophistication that went far beyond the crude intimidation tactics employed by most pirates of the era. The transformation of Edward K. Teach into the legendary Blackbeard reached its terrifying crescendo during the years 1717 and 1718, when his name became synonymous with maritime terror throughout the Western Atlantic. From his flagship Queen Anne's Revenge, he orchestrated a campaign of psychological warfare and strategic piracy that would elevate him from merely another successful pirate captain to a figure whose very existence seemed to challenge the established order of European colonial power in the New World. The months following his assumption of independent command revealed the full scope of Teach's strategic vision, as he began implementing plans that went far beyond simple ship-taking to encompass something approaching a maritime empire. His understanding of geography, politics, and human psychology cues allowed him to identify and exploit weaknesses in the colonial system that others had overlooked or dismissed as too dangerous to attempt. Where other pirates operated as essentially maritime bandits, striking randomly and fleeing to remote hideouts. Blackbeard conceived of piracy as a form of asymmetric warfare that could challenge the very foundations of imperial authority. The selection of his operational territories demonstrated this sophisticated approach to pirate strategy, rather than limiting himself to the traditional Caribbean hunting grounds, where competition with other pirates was fierce and naval patrols increasingly effective. Keach extended his operations northward along the American coast, targeting the vital shipping lanes that connected the growing colonial economies with their European markets. This northern expansion brought him into contact with merchant vessels, carrying cargoes that were often more valuable and less well defended than the traditional Spanish treasure ships that drew most pirate attention. The port cities of Charleston, Philadelphia, New York, and Boston had grown prosperous through trade networks that depended on the relatively safe passage of merchant vessels along predictable routes and schedules. The sudden appearance of a pirate force capable of blockading major harbors and intercepting entire merchant fleets challenged assumptions about security that had governed colonial commerce for decades. Blackbeard's ability to strike at targets hundreds of miles from traditional pirate strongholds created a sense of vulnerability that extended far beyond the immediate victims of his raids. Queen Anne's Revenge served as the flagship of a small but formidable fleet that Teach assembled through a combination of captured vessels and voluntary associations with other pirate captains. The logistical challenges of coordinating multiple ships across vast distances required organizational skills that went far beyond those needed for single-ship operations. Communications had to be maintained between vessels that might be separated by hundreds of miles, supply lines established to remote bases, and command structures developed that could function effectively despite the democratic traditions of pirate culture. The crew of Queen Anne's Revenge itself represented a microcosm of the diverse and often desperate men who found refuge in piracy during this era. Former sailors from merchant and naval vessels formed the backbone of experienced hands who could handle the complex sailing requirements of a large warship. Escaped slaves, particularly those with maritime experience, brought valuable skills along with powerful motivations for avoiding recapture. Indentured servants who had fled their obligations, debtors escaping creditors, and men wanted for various crimes in their home countries all found opportunity for reinvention under Blackbeard's command. The management of such a diverse and potentially volatile crew required leadership skills that combined iron discipline with an understanding of the economic and social motivations that drove men to piracy. Teach's success in maintaining crew loyalty and effectiveness while operating far from traditional pirate safe havens suggests a sophisticated grasp of group psychology and organizational management. His ability to balance the democratic ideals that crew members expected with the authoritarian control necessary for complex military operations marked him as a leader of unusual capabilities. The evolution of Blackbeard's personal image during this period reflected his understanding that in an age of slow communications and limited literacy, reputation could be as powerful as actual force in achieving strategic objectives. The theatrical elements that had begun during his apprenticeship under Hornigold became increasingly elaborate and carefully calculated for maximum psychological impact. His appearance before battle, wreathed in sulfurous smoke from the hemp matches burning in his hair and beard, created an almost supernatural presence that often induced panic among opponents before any shots were fired. The cultivation of this fearsome image extended beyond mere theatricality to encompass a carefully constructed mythology that drew on existing fears and superstitions common among sailors of the era. Stories began to circulate that attributed superhuman abilities to Blackbeard, that he could sail his ship faster than the wind, that he had made pacts with dark forces, that he was immune to ordinary weapons. While Teach certainly didn't discourage these tales, evidence suggests he was pragmatic enough to understand that his power ultimately rested on more mundane foundations of superior seamanship, strategic thinking, and careful planning. The weapons and equipment that Blackbeard and his crew employed reflected both the practical requirements of their profession and the psychological impact that heavily armed pirates could have on merchant crews and colonial authorities. Queen Anne's Revenge mounted 40 cannons of various sizes, making it one of the most heavily armed vessels in American waters, incapable of engaging all but the largest naval warships on relatively equal terms. The ship's armament sent a clear message that Blackbeard was prepared for serious warfare rather than mere ship-taking, elevating the threat level he represented in the minds of both potential victims and authorities. Personal weapons became part of the theatrical display that enhanced Blackbeard's reputation for invincibility and supernatural power. Contemporary accounts describe him carrying multiple pistols thrust through a silk sash across his chest, each weapon loaded and primed for immediate use. His cutlass was reportedly of unusual size and design, possibly custom-made to match his physical stature and serve as a visible symbol of his authority. These weapons, while certainly functional, also served as props in the ongoing performance that was the Blackbeard persona. The strategic locations chosen for Blackbeard's most famous operations revealed his sophisticated understanding of colonial economics and geography. The blockade of Charleston Harbor in May 1718 represented perhaps the most audacious demonstration of pirate power in American colonial history, as Teach effectively held an entire major port city hostage while conducting negotiations for supplies and prisoners. For nearly a week, no vessel entered or left Charleston Harbor without Blackbeard's permission, demonstrating a level of control over colonial commerce that shocked authorities and citizens alike. The Charleston blockade also illustrated Blackbeard's understanding of the political and economic pressures that could be brought to bear on colonial authorities through the strategic application of force. Rather than simply looting individual ships, he created a situation where the entire commercial life of a major port was disrupted, forcing local officials to weigh the costs of resistance against the benefits of accommodation. The successful resolution of the blockade on terms favorable to the pirates demonstrated that even major colonial cities were vulnerable to well-organized pirate operations. The prisoners taken during the Charleston affair provided valuable intelligence about shipping schedules, cargo manifests, and security arrangements that enhanced the effectiveness of future operations. The practice of interrogating captives for information about other potential targets was a standard element of pirate operations. But Blackbeard's systematic approach to intelligence gathering suggests a level of professional competence that elevated his activities above those of more opportunistic criminals. The aftermath of the Charleston blockade saw Blackbeard's reputation reach its zenith, with his name becoming synonymous with pirate power throughout the American colonies and the Caribbean. Colonial newspapers devoted extensive coverage to his exploits, often embellishing already dramatic events with details that further enhanced his legendary status. The fact that a single pirate captain could effectively challenge the authority of established governments created a sense of crisis that extended far beyond the immediate economic losses caused by his raids. The psychological impact of Blackbeard's operations on colonial society cannot be overstated, as his success challenged fundamental assumptions about the security and stability of European settlement in the New World. The ability of pirates to operate with apparent impunity in waters that were supposed to be under effective governmental control suggested that the colonial system was more fragile than its supporters wanted to admit. This perception of vulnerability had implications that extended far beyond maritime commerce to encompass broader questions about the legitimacy and effectiveness of colonial authority. The beginning of Blackbeard's end came not through military defeat or overwhelming force, but through the slow erosion of the political and economic conditions that had made his remarkable career possible. By the summer of 1718, the very success of his operations had created pressures that would ultimately prove impossible to withstand. As colonial authorities, imperial officials, and rival pirates all began to recognize that the continued existence of his maritime empire posed threats to their own interests that could no longer be tolerated or ignored. The changing political landscape of the early 18th century Atlantic world played a crucial role in the events that would lead to Blackbeard's downfall. The end of the War of Spanish Succession had eliminated the legal framework of privateering that had provided cover and justification for many acts of maritime violence, forcing authorities to take more decisive action against activities they had previously been content to overlook. The growth of colonial economies had created powerful merchant interests with sufficient political influence to demand effective protection for their investments, while the expansion of Royal Naval Forces provided the military resources necessary to challenge even the most formidable pirate operations. The appointment of Woodes Rogers as Royal Governor of the Bahamas in 1718 marked a turning point in imperial policy toward piracy, representing a shift from passive tolerance to active suppression that would have profound implications for pirates throughout the Caribbean. Rogers arrived in Nassau with both military forces and legal authority sufficient to challenge the pirate republic that had flourished there for nearly a decade, offering pardons to those willing to surrender while threatening destruction for those who chose to continue their criminal careers. The response of various pirate leaders to Rogers's ultimatum revealed the different strategies available to men facing the end of the golden age of piracy. Some, like Benjamin Hornigold, chose to accept royal pardons and attempt reintegration into legitimate society, trading their former independence for security and legal protection. Others, including many of Blackbeard's associates, chose to relocate their operations to more remote areas where imperial authority remained weak or non-existent. Blackbeard himself chose a third path that would prove both more ambitious and, ultimately, more dangerous than either accommodation or a simple flight. The decision to establish a base of operations along the North Carolina coast represented Blackbeard's final gamble on his ability to manipulate colonial politics and exploit the gaps between competing authorities. North Carolina in 1718 was a political backwater where the royal governor's authority was disputed. Local officials were often more concerned with personal profit than imperial policy, and the complex geography of sounds and inlets provided natural advantages for those seeking to avoid unwanted attention from naval forces. The relationship that Blackbeard cultivated with North Carolina's colonial government revealed both his political sophistication and the fundamental weaknesses of imperial administration in remote frontier areas. Through a combination of bribery, intimidation, and appeals to local economic interests, he managed to secure what amounted to unofficial sanctuary in the Pamlico Sound region, where his presence was tolerated and even welcomed by officials who profited from his operations, maintaining plausible deniability about their cooperation with the known pirate governor. Charles Eden of North Carolina occupied a particularly complex position in these arrangements, as his authority depended on maintaining the delicate balance between competing local factions while avoiding actions that might provoke direct intervention by royal officials. The evidence suggests that Eden was willing to overlook Blackbeard's presence in exchange for a share of the profits and the understanding that pirate operations would be conducted discreetly enough to avoid embarrassing the colonial administration. This arrangement provided temporary security for Blackbeard while offering Eden access to resources that helped maintain his political position. The daily routine that Blackbeard established during his months in North Carolina revealed a man attempting to balance the requirements of maintaining a pirate organization with a desire for something approaching normal domestic life. Contemporary accounts describe him dividing his time between his ship and the house in the village of Bath, where he maintained relationships with local merchants, officials, and social leaders that provided both cover for his activities and intelligence, about potential opportunities and threats. This period of relative stability allowed observers to see aspects of Blackbeard's personality that were normally concealed behind the theatrical persona he had created for psychological warfare purposes. Accounts from this time describe a man of considerable intelligence and charm. We could discuss literature and current events with educated colonists while maintaining the loyalty and respect of his rough crew. His ability to function effectively in both civilized society and the brutal world of piracy suggests complexity of character that goes far beyond the simple monster portrayed in popular mythology. The marriage that Blackbeard contracted during his stay in North Carolina, reportedly his 14th such union, illustrated both his understanding of the social and legal protections that legitimate relationships could provide and his pragmatic approach to human connections. Whether these marriages were matters of genuine affection, political calculation, or simple convenience remains unclear. But they demonstrate his recognition that even pirates benefited from ties to respectable society when circumstances permitted. Such connections to business activities that Blackbeard pursued while based in North Carolina revealed the economic sophistication that had always underlain his pirate operations. He established trading relationships with local merchants, invested in property, and developed supply networks that served both his immediate needs and his long-term security interests. These activities provided legitimate cover for the presence of his ships and crew, while generating additional income that helped maintain its organization during periods when active piracy was impractical or too dangerous. The intelligence network that Blackbeard maintained from his North Carolina base extended throughout the colonial mid-Atlantic, providing early warning of naval movements, information about valuable cargoes, and advance notice of political developments that might affect his security. This network included sympathetic merchants, corrupt officials, and ordinary sailors who carried information between ports as part of their regular duties, creating a web of contacts that helped compensate for his reduced mobility and smaller operational area. However, it's the very visibility that made Blackbeard's North Carolina arrangement politically viable also made it increasingly dangerous as pressure mounted from other colonial governments and imperial authorities for decisive action against the pirate threat. The Virginia colony, in particular, had suffered significant losses to pirate raids and possessed both the resources and the political will necessary to take action when North Carolina's government proved unwilling or unable to address the problem effectively. As we drift away from the violent end of Blackbeard's legend, let your mind descend like a gentle diving bell into the crystal clear waters of Jamaica's Kingston Harbor, where one of history's most extraordinary archaeological sites lies preserved beneath 40 feet of Caribbean Sea. Here, in the underwater ruins of what was once called the wickedest city in the world, centuries of silt and coral growth have created a time capsule that offers glimpses into a vanished civilization where pirates, merchants, and adventurers created a society unlike anything that existed before or since. The story of Port Royal's archaeological significance begins not with its destruction in 1692, but with the unique conditions that made its preservation possible beneath the waters of the Caribbean. When the great earthquake struck on June 7th of that year, it didn't simply destroy the city, it created one of the most remarkable underwater archaeological sites in the Western Hemisphere, where everyday objects from the late 17th century remain exactly where they fell when the earth opened and the sea rushed in to claim what had been the busiest and most prosperous port in the New World. The initial exploration of the sunken city began in the 1960s, when advances in underwater archaeology and diving technology finally made systematic investigation possible. The early pioneers who descended into those preserved streets found themselves swimming through history itself, where pewter plates still sat on wooden tables, where clay pipes lay scattered across what had once been tavern floors, and where coins from every corner of the Spanish Empire glinted in the filtered sunlight. that penetrated the clear tropical waters. Dr. Edwin Link, one of the earliest scientific investigators of the site, described the eerie sensation of floating through rooms where time seemed to have stopped abruptly on that June morning over 3 centuries ago. His team's discoveries included intact buildings with their roofs and walls still standing, their interiors filled with artifacts that provided unprecedented insights into daily life in the golden age of piracy. The preservation was so remarkable that even organic materials like leather, wood, canned textiles had survived in conditions that would have destroyed them completely on land. The coins that give this segment, its name, represent, perhaps, the most tangible connection to the international nature of Port Royal's economy and the complex web of trade relationships that made the city possible. Spanish pieces of 8, French louis d'or, English guineas, and Dutch guilders all appear in the archaeological record, along with more exotic currency from as far away as the Ottoman Empire and the kingdoms of India. Each coin tells the story of the vast trading networks that converged on this small island, bringing wealth from every corner of the known world to be exchanged, spent, and ultimately lost beneath the waves. The Spanish silver that forms the backbone of Port Royal's numismatic collection came primarily from the great mines of Potosi in present-day Bolivia, where indigenous laborers extracted the precious metal under conditions of almost unimaginable hardship and danger. These coins, minted in Mexico City, Lima, and other colonial centers, carried the distinctive marks and assay stamps that allowed merchants to verify their purity and authenticity in an age when counterfeiting was both common and potentially lethal for those caught practicing it. The journey of these silver coins from the mountain mines of South America to the depths of Kingston Harbor illustrates the complex economic relationships that drove Caribbean piracy and trade in the late 17th century. Spanish treasure fleets, laden with silver from the New World mines, followed predictable routes and schedules that made them attractive targets for both legitimate privateers and outright pirates. The coins recovered from Port Royal represent not just monetary value, but the accumulated profits of countless raids, captures, and trading ventures that funneled wealth from across the Spanish Empire into the coffins and counting houses of English Jamaica. The French coins found scattered throughout the sunken city reflect the complex diplomatic and military relationships that characterized European colonial competition in the Caribbean. France and England alternated between alliance and enmity depending on the shifting balance of power in European politics, creating opportunities for both legitimate trade and quasi-legal piracy that blurred the lines between commerce and warfare. French merchants, pirates, and officials all contributed to Port Royal's economy, leaving behind evidence of their presence in the form of currency that sank with the city. The archaeological context in which these coins have been discovered provides crucial information about the economic and social structures that characterized Port Royal society. Coins found in association with expensive imported goods suggest the presence of wealthy merchants and successful pirates who had accumulated substantial fortunes. Those discovered in more modest domestic contexts revealed the extent to which prosperity had filtered down through society, creating a middle class of artisans, tavern keepers, and small traders who benefited from the city's remarkable economic growth. The underwater excavation techniques required to cover these artifacts safely and scientifically have evolved dramatically since the first crude attempts to salvage treasure from the sunken city. Modern underwater archaeologists use sophisticated mapping techniques, specialized diving equipment, canting procedures to ensure that each discovery is properly recorded and preserved for future study. The work is painstakingly slow, as divers can only work for limited periods at depth, and every movement must be carefully controlled to avoid disturbing the delicate archaeological layers that preserve the city's history. The conservation challenges presented by artifacts recovered from underwater sites like Port Royal are among the most complex in the archaeological world. Metals corrode differently in saltwater than in terrestrial environments, creating unique preservation problems that require specialized treatment to prevent further deterioration once objects are exposed to air. The coins themselves often arrive at conservation laboratories encrusted with marine growth and corrosion products that must be carefully removed to reveal the original surfaces and inscriptions beneath. The scientific analysis of Port Royal's coins has revealed information about metallurgy, minting practices, and economic relationships that would be impossible to obtain from documentary sources alone. Case fluorescence spectroscopy allows researchers to determine the exact composition of silver and gold coins, revealing information about mining sources, refining techniques, and the gradual debasement of currency that characterized Spanish colonial monetary policy. These technical studies provide insights into the broader economic forces that shaped Caribbean society during the Golden Age of piracy. The distribution patterns of different coin types throughout the excavated areas of Port Royal reflect the social and economic geography of the city before its destruction. Spanish silver dominates in areas associated with merchant warehouses and wealthy residential districts, suggesting that the most successful traders and pirates preferred to deal in the most widely accepted international currency. English and French coins appear more frequently in areas associated with taverns, shops, and working-class housing, indicating that local and regional currencies played important roles in everyday commerce. The hordes of coins discovered in some locations suggest that residents had advance warning of the approaching disaster, allowing them time to gather their most valuable possessions before attempting to flee. These concentrated deposits often include coins from multiple countries and decades, representing the accumulated savings of individuals who had prospered in Port Royal's unique economic environment. The fact that these hoards were left behind indicates either that their owners perished in the earthquake or that they were forced to abandon their wealth when the ground opened beneath their feet. The personal jewelry and decorative objects found alongside the monetary evidence provide additional insights into the tastes and aspirations of Port Royal's diverse population. Gold rings, silver buckles, and elaborate belt ornaments reflect both the wealth that piracy and trade brought to the city and the desire of successful criminals and merchants to display their prosperity through material possessions. Many of these objects show clear Spanish or French influence in their design, suggesting either that they were originally stolen from victims of piracy or that local artisans were adapting foreign styles to appeal to their cosmopolitan clientele. Floating through the submerged thoroughfares of Port Royal, modern divers encounter a ghost city where the rhythms of daily life from over 3 centuries ago remain frozen in coral and sediment. The streets that once echoed with the calls of merchants, the laughter of tavern patrons, and the heavy tread of pirates carrying their ill-gotten gains now lie silent beneath the Caribbean waters. Their cobblestones worn smooth by currents instead of countless footsteps. Every building, every room, every scattered artifact tells part of a larger story about how people lived, worked, and dreamed in what was arguably the most cosmopolitan and lawless city of its age. The residential districts of submerged Port Royal reveal a social stratification that was both rigid and fluid, reflecting the unique economic opportunities that piracy and trade created in the late 17th century Caribbean. The largest and most elaborate houses, their foundations still clearly visible beneath decades of marine growth, belonged to the merchant princes and successful pirate captains who had accumulated enough wealth to live like European nobility, while remaining safely beyond the reach of metropolitan justice. These residences, with their multiple rooms, elaborate fireplaces, and extensive storage areas, demonstrate that criminal success could indeed purchase comfort and respectability, at least in the short term. The archaeological evidence from these elite households paints a picture of lives lived in deliberate luxury, as if their occupants were determined to enjoy every possible comfort while they remained alive and free to do so. Fine furniture imported from England and France, elaborate silver services that may have been looted from Spanish treasure ships, and collections of books and musical instruments suggest that successful pirates and merchants attempted to recreate the cultural refinements of European civilization, even in their Caribbean exile. The presence of expensive wines, exotic spices, and delicate glassware indicates that money was no object when it came to the pursuit of pleasure and status. Yet, even in these grand houses, the underwater archaeologists have found evidence of the violence and uncertainty that characterized life in Port Royal. Hidden compartments that once concealed weapons and valuables, reinforced doors designed to withstand forced entry, and secret passages that could provide escape routes during PSEs, during emergencies, all speak to the constant awareness of danger that lurked beneath the surface of even the most prosperous lives. The beautiful objects and comfortable furnishings existed alongside the tools of survival in a world where yesterday's ally might become tomorrow's enemy without warning. The middle-class districts of the sunken city reveal how prosperity had filtered down through Port Royal society, creating opportunities for skilled artisans, cave keepers, and small traders who served the needs of the wealthy pirates and merchants. These smaller houses, while lacking the grandeur of the elite residences, still contained imported goods and luxury items that would have been far beyond the reach of similar social classes in other Caribbean colonies. The presence of fine ceramics, silver utensils, and fashionable clothing in these modest homes demonstrates how the enormous wealth that flowed through Port Royal benefited even those who were not directly involved in piracy or major trading ventures. The workshops and commercial establishments scattered throughout the residential areas provide fascinating insights into the specialized skills and services that were required to maintain Port Royal's unique economy. Blacksmith shops containing tools for both peaceful crafts and weapon making. Carpenter workshops with evidence of both furniture production and ship repair. And jewelry making establishments that may have been involved in melting down and reworking. Stolen precious metals all demonstrate the practical infrastructure that supported the city's criminal enterprises while serving legitimate commercial needs. The taverns and alehouses of Port Royal, now represented by their stone foundations and scattered artifacts, were once the social and economic centers of pirate society, serving functions that went far beyond simple entertainment and refreshment. These establishments served as informal employment agencies where captains recruited crew members, intelligence networks where information about shipping and naval movements was exchanged, and financial institutions where the proceeds of piracy were converted into usable currency or invested in future ventures. The archaeological evidence from these sites includes gaming pieces, musical instruments, and elaborate drinking vessels that speak to their role as centers of social life in a community that valued immediate pleasure over long-term planning. The international character of Port Royal's population is dramatically illustrated by the diversity of cultural artifacts found throughout the underwater ruins. Spanish religious medals and prayer books, French decorative objects and personal items, Dutch pipes and pottery, and African cultural artifacts all appear in the archaeological record, often in close association within individual households or commercial establishments. This material evidence demonstrates that Port Royal was truly a melting pot where people from across the Atlantic world came together in pursuit of wealth and opportunity, creating a unique multicultural society that existed nowhere else in the colonial Americas. The presence of African cultural artifacts is particularly significant as it provides rare archaeological evidence of the experiences of enslaved people and free people of color in Caribbean pirate society. Ceramic vessels showing African design influences metal objects that may have served ritual or decorative purposes, and personal ornaments that reflect African aesthetic traditions all indicate that African cultural practices survived and adapted within Port Royal's diverse community. The distribution of these artifacts throughout the city, rather than being confined to specific areas, suggests that people of African descent were integrated into Port Royal society in ways that were unusual for the colonial period. The religious landscape of Port Royal, as revealed through archaeological investigation, was as complex and diverse as its population. The ruins of at least 4 churches representing different Christian denominations have been identified beneath the waters, along with numerous religious artifacts that reflect the spiritual diversity of the city's inhabitants. Catholic medals and Protestant prayer books often appear in the same archaeological contexts, suggesting that many residents maintained flexible approaches to religious observance that prioritized practical benefits over theological consistency. The medical and health-related artifacts recovered from the sunken city provide sobering insights into the challenges of maintaining health and treating injuries in a tropical environment, where violence was common and medical knowledge was limited. Surgical instruments, medicine bottles, and medical texts found in what may have been physicians' quarters illustrate the constant struggle against disease, injury, and the effects of excessive drinking that characterized life in Port Royal. The presence of both European medical equipment and artifacts that may represent traditional African or indigenous healing practices suggest that residents drew on multiple medical traditions in their efforts to maintain health and treat ailments. The evidence for food production and consumption in Port Royal reveals both the abundance that wealth could purchase and the limitations imposed by tropical climate and limited local agriculture. Archaeological deposits contain remains of imported foods from Europe and North America, alongside evidence of local fish, tropical fruits, and other Caribbean products. The presence of elaborate cooking equipment, expensive spices, and fine dining implements in many households suggests that successful residents place considerable importance on the quality and presentation of their meals, perhaps as a way of demonstrating their prosperity and maintaining connections to European cultural norms. The children's toys and educational materials found throughout the underwater ruins provide touching evidence that Port Royal was not simply a temporary haven for transient criminals, but a genuine community where people established families and planned for the future. Despite the uncertainties of their circumstances, toy soldiers, dolls, game pieces, and books designed for young readers all indicate that many residents intended to raise children in the city and provide them with educations that will prepare them for productive adult lives, whether in legitimate or illegitimate pursuits. As the decades pass and technology advances, Port Royal continues to yield new secrets to the patient archaeologists who descend into its coral-encrusted streets. Each expedition uncovering fresh evidence of the complex society that once thrived above these now sealant waters. The mysteries that remain buried in the sediment are as intriguing as those already brought to light, promising revelations that could reshape our understanding of Caribbean colonial society. International trade networks, and the golden age of piracy that defined this remarkable period in Atlantic history. The unexplored sectors of the sunken city represent a vast archaeological frontier where future discoveries may revolutionize our knowledge of 17th century colonial life. Advanced sonar mapping has revealed the outlines of entire districts that remain virtually untouched by excavation, their buildings intact beneath layers of sand and marine growth that have protected them from centuries of Caribbean storms and human interference. These pristine archaeological zones may contain archives of documents, collections of artifacts, and structural evidence that could provide unprecedented insights into the daily operations of history's most notorious pirate haven. The governmental and administrative buildings of Port Royal, many of which remain unexplored beneath the harbor waters, potentially hold the keys to understanding how this lawless city actually functioned as a political and economic entity. The ruins of the customs house, the governor's residence. And various municipal buildings may contain official records, correspondence, and administrative documents that survived the catastrophe in waterproof containers or protective environments. These materials could reveal the extent of official corruption, the mechanisms by which pirate wealth was laundered into legitimate commerce, and the complex relationships between colonial authorities and the criminal enterprises they supposedly opposed. The discovery of intact ship remains in the deeper waters of Kingston Harbor continues to provide new information about the vessels that made Port Royal's prosperity possible. Recent archaeological investigations have uncovered what appeared to be purpose-built pirate ships, modified merchant vessels, and captured warships that tell the story of how pirates adapted existing maritime technology to serve their unique needs. The preservation of these vessels in the deep, oxygen-poor waters of the harbor has maintained organic materials like wood, rope, and canvas that provide detailed information about ship construction techniques, modification practices, and the daily life of sailors and pirates who spent months at sea in vessels that served as both homes and weapons. The analysis of ballast stones recovered from these shipwrecks has revealed unexpected information about the geographic origins and trading patterns of vessels that used Port Royal as their base of operations. Stones from European quarries, North American rivers, and African coastlines all appear in the archaeological record, demonstrating the truly international scope of the maritime networks that converged on this small Caribbean island. The study of these seemingly mundane artifacts has provided new insights into trade routes, navigation practices, and global economic relationships that made Caribbean piracy both possible and profitable. The ongoing investigation of Port Royal cemetery areas has yielded remarkable discoveries about the health, demographics, and cultural practices of the city's diverse population. The preservation of human remains in the underwater environment has allowed researchers to conduct detailed studies of diet, disease, and injury patterns that provide unprecedented insights into the physical realities of life in a pirate haven. Evidence of malnutrition alongside signs of excessive alcohol consumption, tropical diseases mixed with battle wounds, and European burial practices adapted to Caribbean conditions all contribute to a complex picture of how people lived and died in this unique colonial setting. The genetic analysis of human remains from Port Royal has begun to reveal the ancestral origins of the city's population with a precision that was impossible using traditional archaeological methods. DNA studies have confirmed the presence of individuals from across Europe, Africa, and the Americas, while also revealing unexpected population movements and cultural mixing that challenge conventional assumptions about colonial demographics. These studies have demonstrated that Port Royal truly was a melting pot where people from across the Atlantic world came together to create something entirely new in human social organization. The sophisticated preservation techniques now available. 2 underwater archaeologists have made it possible to recover and analyze materials that were once considered too fragile or degraded to provide useful information. Advanced chemical treatments can now restore legibility to documents that have been underwater for centuries, while microscopic analysis can reveal details of textile production, food preparation, and craft techniques that were invisible to earlier investigators. These technological advances have essentially doubled the amount of information that can be extracted from each artifact, making ongoing research at Port Royal increasingly productive despite the limited scope of new excavations. The environmental reconstruction of pre-earthquake Port Royal has revealed surprising information about the natural setting that made the city's remarkable prosperity possible. Analysis of plant remains, animal bones, and geological deposits has shown that the original landscape was significantly different from the modern environment, with deeper harbors, more extensive wetlands, and richer agricultural potential that supported a larger population than the modern site could accommodate. Understanding these environmental changes has helped archaeologists interpret the spatial organization of the city and the economic activities that sustained its growth. The study of food remains from Port Royal has provided fascinating insights into the international culinary culture that developed in this cosmopolitan setting. Archaeological deposits contain evidence of Spanish, French, English, African, and indigenous American food traditions, all existing side by side, with individual households often showing evidence of multiple culinary influences within their daily meals. The presence of exotic spices, imported wines, cupped, and elaborate cooking equipment demonstrates that successful pirates and merchants spared no expense in pursuing culinary pleasures that reflected both their wealth and their multicultural environment. The investigation of craft production areas within the sunken city has revealed the extent to which Port Royal developed specialized industries to serve its unique economic needs. Workshops for the production of weapons, the modification of stolen goods to disguise their origins, and the creation of forged documents all appear in the archaeological record, demonstrating that the city's economy extended far beyond simple piracy to encompass a wide range of criminal and quasi-legal enterprises. These specialized industries required skilled workers and sophisticated organizational structures that challenged stereotypes about pirate society as chaotic and disorganized. The recovery of navigation instruments and nautical charts from various locations throughout Port Royal has provided new information about the geographic knowledge and technical capabilities of Caribbean pirates. Advanced mathematical instruments, detailed maps showing secret harbors and safe passages, and sophisticated compass and timing devices all demonstrate that successful piracy required high levels of technical expertise and geographic knowledge. The presence of these materials in private homes, as well as official buildings, suggests that navigation skills were widely distributed throughout the pirate community rather than being monopolized by a few specialists. The analysis of glass artifacts from Port Royal has revealed unexpected information about international trade, relationships, and manufacturing techniques in the late 17th century. Glass beads, bottles, and decorative objects found throughout the ruins show influences from European, Asian, and American production centers, demonstrating the global scope of the trade networks that supplied the city's markets. The presence of locally produced glass items alongside imported pieces suggests that Port Royal developed its own manufacturing capabilities to serve both local needs and export markets, adding another layer to the city's complex economy. The study of metal artifacts from the underwater site has provided new insights into both the technological capabilities of Port Royal's artisans and the sources of raw materials that supplied their workshops. Chemical analysis of iron, brass, and pewter objects has revealed the geographic origins of the ores used in their production, while examination of manufacturing techniques has shown the influence of multiple metalworking traditions adapted to local conditions and available materials. The presence of sophisticated metalworking tools and equipment demonstrates that Port Royal possessed industrial capabilities that rivaled those of major European cities. The investigation of Port Royal's water supply and sanitation systems has revealed surprising evidence of urban planning and public health measures that challenge assumptions about the chaotic nature of pirate society. Archaeological evidence shows that the city possessed sophisticated systems for supplying fresh water, disposing of waste, and maintaining public hygiene that were advanced for their time and setting. These infrastructure investments demonstrate that Port Royal's leaders understood the importance of maintaining livable conditions for a large urban population in a challenging tropical environment. The discovery of educational materials and libraries throughout Port Royal has provided new evidence of the intellectual life that flourished alongside the city's criminal enterprises. Books on navigation, medicine, law, literature, and natural philosophy all appear in the archaeological record, often in association with mathematical instruments, writing materials, and other tools of learning. The presence of these materials in both private homes and public buildings suggest that Port Royal attracted educated individuals who valued learning and intellectual pursuits as much as financial gain. The ongoing analysis of Port Royal's architectural remains has revealed the influence of multiple building traditions adapted to Caribbean conditions and available materials. European construction techniques appear alongside African and indigenous American approaches to tropical architecture, creating distinctive building styles that reflected both the cultural diversity of the city's population and the practical requirements of life in a hurricane-prone environment. The study of these architectural adaptations provides insights into how different cultural groups influenced each other and created new synthetic traditions that were uniquely Caribbean. As we leave the coral-encrusted streets of sunken Port Royal behind, let your mind drift northward across the Atlantic to the windswept coasts of 16th century Ireland, as the story of perhaps history's most remarkable female pirate unfolds against the backdrop of clan warfare, English conquest, and the ancient Gaelic traditions that had governed Irish society for 1,000 years. Here, in the harsh beauty of Clew Bay and the scattered islands of County Mayo, a woman named Granny Mayel, known to history as Grace O'Malley, would challenge every assumption about power, gender, and authority in Renaissance Europe. The Ireland into which Grace O'Malley was born around 1530 was a land caught between two worlds, where ancient Celtic traditions of tribal kingship and maritime power struggled against the advancing tide of English centralization and Protestant Reformation. The western coast of Connacht, with its maze of islands, hidden harbors, and treacherous currents, had remained largely beyond the reach of English authority, allowing Gaelic clans like the O'Malleys to maintain their traditional ways of life, based on cattle raiding, maritime trade, and the complex web of alliances and feuds that had shaped Irish politics since time immemorial. The O'Malley clan, known in Irish as the Y Male, had controlled the seas around Clew Bay for generations, their power resting not on land ownership in the English sense, but on their ability to extract tribute from vessels passing through their waters, and their mastery of the specialized seamanship required to navigate the dangerous coastal waters of Western Ireland. The clan's motto, Terra Marique, Batents, powerful by land and sea, reflected this dual nature of their authority, which combined the traditional Irish emphasis on cattle and kinship with the maritime expertise that made them masters of their coastal domain. Grace's father, Owen O'Malley, was the chief of the clan and a man whose reputation for both seamanship and political cunning had made him one of the most respected leaders in Connacht. From him, Grace would learn not only the practical skills of navigation and ship handling that would serve her throughout her remarkable career, but also the diplomatic arts that were essential for survival in the complex world of Irish clan politics. The O'Malley territories, scattered across dozens of islands and coastal strongholds, required constant vigilance and careful management to maintain their independence against both Irish rivals and English encroachment. The maritime culture that shaped Grace's childhood was unlike anything that existed elsewhere in Renaissance Europe, combining elements of ancient Celtic seafaring traditions with innovations adapted from contact with Spanish, Portuguese, and English traders. The vessels used by the O'Malleys were specially designed for the unique conditions of the Irish coast, with shallow drafts that allowed them to navigate the complex channels between islands and sturdy construction that could withstand the fierce Atlantic storms that regularly battered the western shores. These ships, typically rigged as galleys with both sails and oars, could outrun larger vessels in calm weather while maintaining maneuverability in the confined waters where they operated. The economic foundation of O'Malley power rested on a sophisticated understanding of maritime trade, relationships that extended far beyond the immediate waters of Clew Bay. Irish merchants traded cattle, cues, and raw materials to Spanish and French ports in exchange for wine, weapons, and luxury goods that were then distributed throughout the western counties of Ireland. The O'Malleys' control of key harbors and sea routes allowed them to collect tribute from this trade, while also participating directly in commercial ventures that brought continental European goods to Irish markets. Grace's education in the art of leadership began early, as she accompanied her father on trading voyages and diplomatic missions that took her throughout the waters of Western Ireland and across the Irish Sea to Scotland and northern England. These experiences provided her with a practical understanding of navigation, ship handling, and the complex negotiations required to maintain trading relationships in a world where political alliances shifted constantly and where the difference between legitimate commerce and outright piracy was often a matter of perspective and circumstance. The legendary story of Grace's first assertion of independence, when she cut her hair short and disguised herself as a boy to join her father's crew against his wishes, may be mythical in its details, but accurately reflects the determined character that would drive her remarkable career, whether or not she actually sailed disguised as a male crew member. It is clear that from an early age, Grace possessed both the physical courage and the force of personality necessary to command respect in the masculine world of 16th century seafaring. The marriage that Grace contracted around 1546 with Donnell O'Flaherty, heir to another powerful maritime clan, represented both a personal choice and a strategic alliance that would expand her influence throughout the coastal regions of Western Ireland. The O'Flaherty territories centered on the fortress of Bunowan Castle in County Galway, controlled important sea routes along the southern approaches to Galway Bay, making this union a significant consolidation of maritime power that alarmed both rival Irish clans and English authorities who were beginning to take notice of developments in the supposedly barbarous western regions. The death of Donnell O'Flaherty in clan warfare around 1560 marked the beginning of Grace's transformation from clan wife to independent leader. She successfully claimed control of her late husband's fleet and followers, despite the traditional Irish legal principles that typically transferred such authority to male relatives. Her ability to maintain the loyalty of seasoned warriors and sailors who had served under her husband demonstrated both her personal charisma and her practical understanding of the economic and political relationships that held clan society together. The establishment of Grace's independent power base required careful navigation of the complex legal and cultural traditions that governed Irish society. Guess she had to balance respect for ancient customs with the practical necessities of maintaining authority in a world that was rapidly changing under English pressure. Her success in this balancing act reflected both her political intelligence and her ability to adapt traditional forms of leadership to new circumstances, creating a unique form of female authority that had few parallels in Renaissance Europe. The pinnacle of Grace O'Malley's remarkable career came not through any spectacular naval victory or daring raid, but through a diplomatic encounter so extraordinary that it challenges our understanding of power, authority, and female leadership in the 16th century. In 1593, the Irish Sea Queen sailed to London to request a personal audience with Elizabeth I of England, creating a meeting between two of the most powerful women of their age that would become the stuff of legend and demonstrate the unique position that Grace had carved out for herself in the complex political landscape of Renaissance Europe. The circumstances that led to this unprecedented diplomatic mission reflected the deteriorating situation in Ireland as English control tightened around the traditional Gaelic strongholds that had maintained their independence for centuries. The death of Grace's second husband, Richard Burke, Keane, 1583, had eliminated an important political alliance, while the increasing effectiveness of English naval patrols in Irish waters threatened the maritime activities that formed the foundation of her power and wealth. Most critically, the capture of her son Owen by English forces in 1593 created a personal crisis that demanded immediate and decisive action. The decision to seek a direct audience with the English Queen represented a calculated gamble that drew on Grace's sophisticated understanding of both Irish and English political culture, rather than approaching Elizabeth through the normal diplomatic channels that would have subordinated her to English colonial officials in Dublin. Grace chose to present herself as an independent ruler seeking negotiations between equals, a position that was both audacious and strategically brilliant given the limited alternatives available to Irish leaders facing English expansion. The journey from the wild coasts of Western Ireland to the corridors of power in Elizabethan London required Grace to navigate not only the physical challenges of an ocean voyage, but also the complex cultural and political differences between Gaelic Irish society and the sophisticated court culture that surrounded the English Queen. The preparations for this diplomatic mission involved careful consideration of everything from appropriate clothing and gifts to the precise legal and ceremonial protocols that would govern the encounter between two women who represented fundamentally different concepts of sovereignty and authority. The vessel that carried Grace to London was itself a statement of her status and capabilities, as she chose to sail in one of her finest galleys, manned by a crew of her most trusted followers, and equipped with the weapons and navigation equipment that demonstrated her mastery of maritime technology. The sight of this Irish warship entering the Thames and proceeding to anchor near the royal palaces would have been deeply symbolic, representing the ability of Irish leaders to project power even into the heart of English authority. The negotiations that preceded the actual meeting between Grace and Elizabeth revealed the complex web of interests and motivations that shaped Anglo-Irish relations during this crucial period. English officials were torn between their desire to demonstrate the submission of Irish leaders and their recognition that Grace's continued independence might serve English interests better than her destruction, particularly if she could be persuaded to use her maritime capabilities against Spanish influence in Ireland rather than against English expansion. Grace's strategic position in these negotiations was strengthened by the international context of European politics in the 1590s. As England faced the growing threat of Spanish invasion, while also dealing with ongoing conflicts in the Netherlands and France, the prospect of Irish cooperation against Spanish attempts to use Ireland as a base for attacks on England gave Grace valuable leverage in her discussions with English officials, who understood that her ships and local knowledge could be crucial assets in defending the western approaches to the British Isles. The actual encounter between Grace O'Malley and Elizabeth I took place in September 1593, probably at Greenwich Palace, and represented a remarkable convergence of two extraordinary women who had achieved unprecedented power in a male-dominated world through very different but equally impressive combinations, determination, and political skill. The meeting lasted several hours and covered topics ranging from the immediate issue of her son's release to broader questions about the future relationship between England and the independent Irish clans. Contemporary accounts of the meeting, while limited and filtered through the perspectives of English observers, suggest that both women approached the encounter with mutual respect and genuine curiosity about each other's achievements and methods. Elizabeth, who had spent her entire reign defending her authority against male rivals and foreign enemies, would have recognized in Grace a kindred spirit, would have faced similar challenges in establishing and maintaining power in an environment that typically excluded women from leadership roles. The conversation between the two queens was conducted in Latin, the international diplomatic language of the era, demonstrating Grace's sophisticated education and her ability to function effectively in the highest levels of European political culture. The topics discussed reportedly included not only the immediate political issues that had prompted the meeting, but also broader questions about governance, the challenges of female leadership, and the complex relationships between traditional authority and emerging concepts of centralized state power. Grace's presentation of herself during this historic encounter reflected her careful understanding of both Irish and English cultural expectations. As she appeared in clothing that combined elements of traditional Gaelic dress with fashionable European styles, creating a visual representation of her unique position as a leader who operated successfully in both worlds. Her gifts to Elizabeth reportedly included items of Irish craftsmanship alongside more conventional diplomatic presence, demonstrated her awareness of the symbolic importance of cultural exchange in international relations. The agreements reached during the meeting represented remarkable diplomatic achievement that secured the immediate release of Grace's son, while also establishing a framework for future cooperation between her forces and English authorities in defending Ireland against Spanish intervention. Elizabeth's decision to grant Grace a royal pension and to recognize her as a legitimate leader responsible for maintaining order in her territories represented an unprecedented acknowledgement of female authority that challenged conventional assumptions about sovereignty and gender in Renaissance political theory. The personal relationship that apparently developed between the two women during their encounter suggests that both recognized in the other a leader who had overcome similar obstacles and faced comparable challenges in establishing and maintaining authority in a hostile environment. Elizabeth's later correspondence refers to Grace with evident respect and interest, while Grace's subsequent actions demonstrated a genuine commitment to the agreements they had reached, suggesting that their diplomatic relationship was based on mutual understanding rather than mere political convenience. The implementation of the agreements reached between Grace and Elizabeth required careful management of the complex political relationships that connected Irish clan society with English colonial administration. Grace's new status as a recognized ally of the English crown created opportunities for expanded trade and maritime activities, while also imposing obligations to cooperate with English officials and to refrain from actions that might threaten English interests or provide assistance to Spanish forces operating in Irish waters. The transformation of Grace from rebel leader to English ally represented a significant shift in the balance of power in Western Ireland. Sir Fleet and followers now served English strategic interests while maintaining their traditional autonomy in local affairs. This arrangement provided a model for the kind of negotiated settlement that might have prevented the devastating wars that would soon engulf Ireland, demonstrating the potential for diplomatic solutions to conflicts that were typically resolved through military force alone. The impact of Grace's successful negotiation with Elizabeth extended far beyond her immediate followers to influence the broader development of Anglo-Irish relations during the final decades of the 16th century. Her example demonstrated that Irish leaders who possessed sufficient military capability and political intelligence could negotiate from positions of strength rather than simply accepting English demands for unconditional submission, encouraging other clan leaders to seek similar accommodations while they still retained the resources necessary for effective bargaining. The final chapter of Grace O'Malley's extraordinary life unfolded against the backdrop of a rapidly changing Ireland, where the ancient Gaelic world that had shaped her youth was giving way to a new order dominated by English law, Protestant religion, and centralized authority that would fundamentally transform Irish society. The woman who had once commanded fleets and negotiated with queens now faced the challenge of securing her legacy and protecting her people during a period of unprecedented upheaval that would test all the political skills and personal resilience she had developed over decades of leadership. The death of Queen Elizabeth I in 1603 marked more than just the end of a dynasty. It represented the conclusion of a personal relationship that had provided Grace with protection and recognition that would prove impossible to maintain under the new Stuart monarchy. James I, who succeeded Elizabeth as ruler of both England and Scotland, brought with him different priorities and advisors who lacked the intimate knowledge of Irish conditions that had made Elizabeth's Irish policies relatively nuanced and flexible. The new king's emphasis on religious conformity and administrative efficiency left little room for the kind of informal accommodations that had allowed leaders like Grace to maintain their traditional authority while accepting English overlordship. The transformation of Ireland under the new English administration accelerated during the early years of James I's reign, as policies designed to eliminate the last vestiges of Gaelic Kina were implemented with systematic thoroughness that had been absent from earlier conquest efforts. The plantation of Ulster, which began in earnest after the flight of the Earls in 1607, provided a model for the systematic replacement of Gaelic landholding patterns with English legal concepts of property ownership that would eventually extend throughout Ireland, including the western regions where Grace's influence had been strongest. Grace's response to these changing circumstances demonstrated the pragmatic flexibility that had characterized her entire career, as she worked to position her family and followers advantageously within the new political order while maintaining as much as possible of the traditional authority and autonomy that had defined her leadership. The correspondence that survives from her final years reveals a woman who understood clearly that the old world was ending, but who remained determined to secure the best possible outcomes for those who depended on her protection and guidance. The legal challenges that Grace faced during her later years reflected the broader conflicts between Gaelic and English concepts of authority, property, and inheritance that were playing out throughout Ireland as traditional Irish law was replaced by English common law. Her efforts to secure legal recognition for her sons' inheritance rights required navigation of complex English legal procedures that were often at odds with the traditional Irish customs that had governed succession and property transfer for centuries. The success of these legal efforts demonstrated Grace's ability to master new systems of authority while using her accumulated political capital to protect her family's interests. The maritime activities that had formed the foundation of Grace's power and wealth necessarily declined during her final years, as English control of Irish waters became more effective in the traditional trading relationships that had sustained the Gaelic maritime economy were disrupted by new commercial patterns that favored English merchants and shipping. The transformation of her role from active sea captain to elder stateswoman reflected both a natural progression of age and the changing political environment that made her earlier forms of leadership less viable and more dangerous. The religious changes that accompanied English conquest created additional challenges for Grace, who had lived most of her life in a Catholic Ireland, where traditional Irish Christianity coexisted comfortably with older Celtic spiritual traditions. The increasing pressure for conformity to the established Protestant Church created difficult choices for Irish leaders who wished to maintain their political positions while preserving their religious convictions. Grace's approach to these religious pressures demonstrated the same pragmatic flexibility that had characterized her political career, as she balanced the requirements of public conformity with private adherence to traditional beliefs. The transmission of Grace's accumulated knowledge and experience to the next generation became one of her primary concerns during her final years, as she worked to ensure that her sons and grandsons would possess the skills and understanding necessary to navigate the new political landscape that was emerging in Ireland. The education that she provided to these young men combined traditional Irish learning with the English legal and administrative knowledge that would be essential for success under the new order, demonstrating her recognition that survival required adaptation to changing circumstances. The network of alliances and relationships that Grace had built over decades of political and maritime activity continued to provide support and protection during her later years. Even as the formal structures of Gaelic authority were being dismantled by English administrative reforms, the personal loyalties and mutual obligations that had characterized traditional Irish society proved more durable than the legal and political institutions that had given them formal expression, providing a foundation for continued influence that transcended the official recognition of English authority. The economic legacy of Grace's career extended beyond her immediate family to benefit the broader community of Western Ireland, where the wealth and trade relationships she had developed continued to provide prosperity and opportunities for employment even after her active leadership had ended. The harbors, warehouses, and trading connections that she had established became permanent features of the regional economy, demonstrating how individual leadership could create institutional changes that outlasted the careers of their founders. The cultural impact of Grace's extraordinary career became apparent during her lifetime. Stories of her achievements began to enter the oral tradition of Western Ireland and to influence the expectations and aspirations of other women who observed her example. The legends that grew around her exploits served not only to preserve the memory of her specific achievements, but also to challenge conventional assumptions about the limitations of female authority and capability in traditional Irish society. The preservation of Grace's memory in Irish folklore and tradition reflected the profound impact that her career had on the collective imagination of her people, who found in her story a powerful symbol of resistance to foreign domination and of the possibility for individual courage and intelligence to triumph over seemingly impossible odds. The transformation of the historical Grace O'Malley into the legendary, quote, realm of Irish tradition demonstrated how exceptional individuals could transcend their own times to become permanent features of cultural memory and national identity. The international recognition that Grace achieved during her lifetime extended beyond Ireland to influence perceptions of Irish capabilities and potential throughout Europe, where her success challenged stereotypical views of the Irish as barbarous and incapable of sophisticated political and military organization. The diplomatic correspondence that mentions her activities demonstrates that European observers understood her achievements as evidence of a complex and capable Irish society that deserved respect rather than mere condescension or military suppression. The death of Grace O'Malley, which probably occurred around 1603, marked the end of an era in Irish history and the conclusion of one of the most remarkable individual careers in the annals of European leadership. The exact circumstances of her death remain uncertain, reflecting both the limitations of historical records from this period and the tendency for legendary figures to fade from the historical view as they merge with the mythological traditions that preserve their memory for future generations. The immediate aftermath of Grace's death saw efforts by English authorities to eliminate the remaining vestiges of her influence and to integrate her territories and followers fully into the new administrative structures that were being established throughout Ireland. The success of these efforts was limited by the continued loyalty of many of her former followers and by the practical difficulties of governing remote coastal regions that have been shaped by centuries of independent development under Gaelic leadership. As our journey through the Caribbean waters and Atlantic seas draws to a close, let yourself drift gently back to the present, carrying with you the echoes of creaking ship timbers, the whisper of tropical trade winds, and the remarkable stories of those who chose to live beyond the boundaries of conventional society. From the maggot-infested hardtack of a pirate, Deckhand's daily existence, to the coral-encrusted treasures of Sunken Port Royal. From Blackbeard's theatrical reign of terror to Grace O'Malley's diplomatic triumph over Queen Elizabeth herself, we have sailed through waters where ordinary people made extraordinary choices that would echo through the centuries. The golden age of piracy was never truly golden, as our voyage has revealed. It was instead a time of desperate choices and dangerous freedoms, where the promise of wealth and autonomy came at the cost of comfort, security, and often life itself. The pirates who populate our imagination as romantic adventurers were, in reality, men and women caught between worlds, fleeing the grinding poverty and rigid social structures of their birth while creating new forms of democracy and community aboard their wooden worlds that floated between civilization and chaos. Yet, in their struggles and triumphs, we find reflections of universal human desires for freedom, dignity, and a chance to shape one's own destiny. The Deckhand enduring rope burns and rotten provisions was also a participant in one of history's most radical experiments in democratic governance. The fearsome Blackbeard, for all his theatrical menace, was ultimately a man undone by the very forces of order and authority that his success had challenged. The treasures beneath Port Royal's waters speak not just of wealth accumulated through violence, but of a cosmopolitan society that briefly flourished at the intersection of multiple cultures and traditions. And Grace O'Malley's remarkable career demonstrates that even in ages that seemed to offer few opportunities for women's leadership, exceptional individuals could create their own paths to power and influence. As you settle into the comfort of your modern bed, surrounded by the safety and convenience that centuries of social progress have provided, let these stories remind you of the fragile nature of the civilization that shelters us all. The pirates of the Caribbean lived in a world where the boundaries between order and chaos, law and lawlessness, civilization and barbarism were fluid and constantly shifting. Their experiences offer both warnings about the costs of social breakdown and inspiration about human resilience in the face of seemingly impossible circumstances. The sea that once carried their vessels across the Atlantic continues its eternal rhythm, indifferent to the dreams and struggles of those who have sailed upon its surface. But the stories of those who chose the uncertain freedom, the waves over the grinding certainties of the shore, remain with us, preserved in the archaeological treasures of sunken cities, the documentary fragments of forgotten archives, and the living traditions of the communities they touched. In their courage and their failures, their brief triumphs and ultimate defeats, we find reflections of our own struggles to balance freedom with security, individual desire with social responsibility, and the dreams of what might be with the realities of what is sleep now, and the knowledge that the wild waters of the Caribbean have been tamed, that the age of pirates has passed into history and legend, and that the morning will bring you safely back to a world where the greatest adventures await in the pages of books and the depths of imagination. Let the gentle rhythm of imagined waves carry you into peaceful dreams where the ghost coins of Port Royal catch the filtered light of the tropical sun, where the wind fills canvas sails with the promise of distant horizons, and where the echo of ancient courage whispers across the centuries that even in the darkest times, the human spirit finds ways to create hope, community, and meaning from the vast uncertainties of existence itself.